Islamic Revolution in Iran has altered international relations and the meaning of revolutionary change in notable ways. It has shaped what it means to bring piety into politics. The Iranian Revolution has confounded experts from a variety of disciplines and backgrounds. What precipitated the revolution and what enabled this movement to succeed where so many others have failed. There's an interesting book which was written about 10 years ago, I believe, by a gentleman called Professor Charles Kurzman, The Unthinkable Revolution in Iran. He's a sociologist who has conducted research in Iran and among Iranian immigrants, examines the traditional theories around revolutions, which in turn emphasize economics, political, cultural, organizational, and military factors, and finds no single explanation sufficient for this particular level of revolution. Instead, what he concludes, so long as revolution remained unthinkable, it remained undoable. That's a very important sort of conclusion that he reaches. He says, so long as the revolution remained unthinkable, it remained undoable. It could come to pass only when large numbers of people began to think that unthinkable. In the current parlance, I suppose, in Nassim Taleb's phraseology, it was a black swan event, which no one really predicted. No one ever thought it was going to happen. How could one imagine that an old man in his 70s, exiled from the land that welcomed him back in 1979, 40 years ago, who didn't have a Kalashnikov, who didn't have an army except what rosaries in his hand and a mat to sit and pray. And it's a telling comment, which I'm sure all of you have heard quite often, when he was arriving in Paris. The journalists and all the people who were in the plane and others asked him, how do you feel arriving in Tehran? And he said, nothing, which really tells a lot about this particular individual who knew what was going on. To him, there was no this jubilation. If a mere mortal like me were there, I would be exciting, I would be jumping with joy, I would be saying I have achieved something remarkable. And he said, nothing. Let me open our discussions for this evening and request our first speaker, who has kindly agreed to be here with us this evening. Before introducing him, I would say he is the publisher and editor of the Politics First magazine, which is a non-partisan publication for the British government. He's also a regular television and radio commentator, specializing in Russia and the rest of the former Soviet Union and former Yugoslavia, Syria and British politics. He holds a PhD in Russian Soviet history from Royal Holloway, University of London. Outside of work, he's a karate instructor. But I suppose in revolutionary times you do need a karate instructor. Very useful. And a vegan and an animal rights activist. There are two individuals in contemporary times that I do admire who originate from Greece. One is Yanis Varoufakis, and the next one is Marcus Papadopoulos. Please welcome Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm thank you to Open Discussions in association with Golf Cultural Club for inviting me to speak here tonight. I'm absolutely delighted to be contributing to a discussion on what was a historical turning point. First of all, let me say this. How ironic is it that as we gather here tonight to discuss the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, and how the US has maliciously pursued the country for what is 4 decades now, the US, as I speak, is currently attempting to engineer a coup in Venezuela to overthrow the legitimate presidency and government of Nicolas Maduro. The geostrategic parallels between Iran and Venezuela are striking, and I will discuss this later on in my speech. Now, I should, first of all, tell you a little bit about myself, though it will be a repetition of what our chair has said tonight. I wear two hats in politics, and both hats are totally distinct from each other, despite what newspapers such as The Times say. So the first hat is publisher and editor of Politics First, which is a non-partisan publication for the UK government and the UK government. It's a magazine written by MPs, for MPs, including articles by the Prime Minister. And because I'm the editor of Politics First, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Press Gallery. Now, the second hat I wear is as a television commentator, orator and writer on matters relating to Russia and the rest of the former Soviet Union, and also the former Yugoslavia. And as the chair said, I hold a doctorate in Russian history. But I also cover Syria extensively, and also Iran, as well as other matters relating to international relations. So that's me in a nutshell. Now, let me turn to Iran. This is a country that I first heard about when I was a child. My father was Greek Cypriot, and I learned from him about the Persian Empire and rulers such as Cyrus the Great, Xerxes the Great, and Darius the Great. So I developed an understanding from quite a young age that Iran is an ancient country with an ancient people and an ancient civilization. And partly because of that awareness, as a child growing up in the 1980s and the early 1990s, I think it's fair to say that I was immune to the malicious propaganda that I witnessed on television and in newspapers from American politicians and journalists regarding Iran. One can only reflect on how enlightenment is a terrific and crucial way of seeing through propaganda, and I would apply that realization not just to Iran, but also to countries such as Russia, Serbia, Syria, and Venezuela, which, as we all know, have been subjected to appalling lies from the US and also its allies. So, looking at the 40th anniversary of Iran's revolution, for me, the most important dimension to this historic turning point is that Iran and its people regained their independence and dignity following years of having endured the humiliation, the indignity of being a client state, a vassal state of the US. That the Iranian people, the heirs to one of the world's most distinguished of civilizations, had once been a slave to America, one of the most decadent and violent of countries in the world, remains a source of discomfort for me to this day. But alas, that was then, and today, Iran is a self-respecting, independent, sovereign country which pursues its interests in the Middle East and in the wider world far more in accordance with the United Nations Charter and international law than countries such as the US and the UK. Today, Iran's national industries and natural resources are owned and managed by the Iranian state, which in effect means the Iranian people. Gone are the days when America, through its companies and corporations, exploited Iran's riches for their own selfish gains. Because of the Iranian Revolution, Iranians, first and foremost, are now the beneficiaries of their country's immense riches. Iran is the 5th country in the world in the volume of natural resources such as oil, gas and coal, and is the 4th richest country globally in terms of the volume of fossil fuel reserves. Since 1979, Iran's wealth, as I said, has been in the hands of the Iranian people, and it is this reason alone as to why America seeks the overthrow of the Iranian government and the destruction of the Iranian Revolution in order to return Iran to how it was in the days of the Shah, namely an American client state that enabled Washington to reap the benefits of Iran's wealth. Let me turn now to the domestic achievements of the Iranian Revolution, and they are numerous. But for me, there are two achievements which stand out most, and they are education and health. Both areas, as once again I'm sure we will all agree on, are the most important for any civilized society in the world. Starting with education, up until 2014, Iran was ranked first in literacy development among persons over the age of 15, while since 1979, the percentage of the Iranian literate population of people over the age of 15 has rocketed to 85%. In health, life expectancy in Iran today is 76, as opposed to 55 in 1979, and Iran was ranked 10th in the world in the life expectancy growth from 1979 to 2016. Also in 2016, Iran was ranked 30th in the most efficient healthcare systems in the world, ahead, I should say, of America. Furthermore, and this is a very important point and one which isn't discussed, not just in the context of Iran, but many countries in the world, suicide rates in Iran are very low, demonstrating that the mental well-being of Iranians is generally high. So, Iran today is ranked 164th out of 183 countries in having the lowest suicide rate in the world. That is quite an achievement, and one that Iran and its people should be extremely proud of. Turning to Iran's role in the Middle East, which changed overnight as a result of the Iranian Revolution. In my opinion, I would contend that Iran's most recent accomplishment, and one that benefits all peoples in the world, is that Iran has played a very significant role in the defeat of terrorism in Syria. Terrorism backed by the US, the UK, France, Turkey, and of course Saudi Arabia. And I'm sure we all know that Saudi Arabia is the leading exporter and financier of terrorism in the world. Not only has Iran's military assistance to the Syrian people proved to be of immense importance in having defeated the various terrorist groups who have waged a brutal, merciless war against Syria, including Al-Qaeda, the so-called Free Syrian Army, and ISIS, but also we need to recognise the economic support that Iran has given to Damascus, especially augmenting Syria's war economy, has helped to sustain the Syrian Arab Army on the front line. The Syrian Arab Army is the heart and soul in the fight against the same brand of terrorism which, in 2017, was responsible for their heinous attacks in Manchester and London. And we also must recognise that Iran has been able to provide military and financial assistance to Syria over a prolonged period of time because the Iranian economy is robust enough to allow for this. So alas, this constitutes another achievement of the Iranian Revolution, because if after the Iranian Revolution the Iranian state had not been able to create a strong economy, then Iran in the last 8 years could have given all the political support to Syria, but they wouldn't have been able to give economic support, and that could have had a very, very detrimental effect on Syria. Staying in the Middle East, since the Iranian Revolution, Iran has been steadfast in its support to the beleaguered Palestinian people, shaming all governments in the Arab world, with the notable exception of the Syrian one, governments who have turned their backs on the Palestinians in order to preserve their relationships with America, which in turn provide these governments, and not the ordinary Arab, with so much wealth that these governments don't know what to do with it all. Eternal shame on those Arab governments and eternal applause for Iran in being an immovable supporter of the Palestinians, a people who are one of the most tormented in the world. Also, as a result of the Syrian people having prevailed against the West's efforts to destroy the Syrian state, an unofficial alliance has now emerged in the Middle East involving Russia, Syria and Iran. That grouping, which is highly dependent on Iran being a part of, will be able in the future to place limits, and I emphasise limits. We're not going to change the existing order of the Middle East. America is still going to be the dominant outside power in the Middle East, but this unofficial alliance between Iran, Syria and Russia will be able to place limits on what America wants to do in the Middle East. Now, that is good for peace in the region, good for stability in the region, and good for the ordinary person in the region. And Iran will play its role in that unofficial alliance because Iran observes an independent foreign policy thanks to the Iranian Revolution. Now, I began my speech by referring to the situation, the current situation in Venezuela, where the Americans have committed yet again another brazen act of aggression against the United Nations Charter and international law in general. And let me say that again, it is a horrific attack on the United Nations Charter and international law. Iran and Venezuela are targeted by the US because both countries are situated in geostrategic parts of the world. Both are rich in natural resources, especially oil, and as we know, the Americans have an insatiable lust for oil. And both Venezuela and Iran are fiercely protective of their independence and sovereignty and have vowed not to surrender these to Washington or indeed any other government in the world. Tehran and Caracas know full well what it is like to be an American brothel. Hence, both will continue to resist all attempts by Washington to destroy their independence and to subjugate them. Further to that, it is vitally important for Iran's security and likewise for Venezuela's security that both Iran and Venezuela remain free from the clutches of Messrs. Trump and Bolton and whoever their wretched successors will be. I would like to end my speech tonight by saying that mistakes, including serious ones, have been made by successive Iranian governments, such as, in my opinion, Iran's dreadful actions during the Bosnian Civil War. And there were excesses following the Iranian Revolution, such as silencing certain political parties. But let's be brutally honest with each other. All governments make serious mistakes, and there are always excesses in countries. I'm not justifying it, I'm simply saying that is human nature. But we need to recognise that in the case of Iran, Russia, Serbia, Syria, America, Britain, that applies across the board. And there are aspects to the system today in Iran which I personally object to, such as making the hijab compulsory. But my criticism is of a constructive nature and one made against the backdrop of my firm and unwavering conviction that Iran must never be lectured to and that it is down to Iranians to decide amongst themselves on internal matters. In short, whatever works for Iran, whatever is conducive to preserving the Iranian national identity and culture, and whatever maintains Iranian independence, sovereignty and national security must be respected by outsiders. We can offer feedback to each other in the world, but we must always recognise that every country is different and has its own unique historical experiences, it has its own cultures, so we can offer advice, but that's it. We offer advice, it's then down to the people. And likewise, I will take feedback from Iranians about my country, Britain, and then it's down to British people, British parliamentarians, journalists, to discuss it amongst themselves. We live in the same world, Let's share ideas with each other, but never, ever condescend people, never patronise people, and never, ever project yourselves as being superior morally. And this wretched concept of Anglo-Saxon superiority really needs to be condemned to the waste bin of history. So I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate Iran on the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolution, and I wish the ancient and magnificent Iranian people continued security and good health over the next 40 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus, for very, very interesting perspective, and also to be very honest about your own views about the Islamic Revolution and how you feedback should work. Thank you. From this rostrum, there are three of us who are non-Iranian. The next speaker is from Iran. Perhaps he might be able to throw some deeper insight into the Islamic Revolution. He was born and raised in Mashhad, the religious capital of Iran. He received his bachelor's degree from Isfahan University after living in the industrial city of the country for 4 years. Then he moved to Tehran, the political capital of the country, to receive a degree in Master of Science. Following his scientific journey, our speaker moved to London to do his PhD at Brunel University. He's a social activist and a member of the Islamic Students Association here in London. Please welcome future Dr. Ali Raza Ghanizadeh.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm really delighted to be here and have a talk with all of you about the real feeling of the Iranian youth about the revolution, what's happening generally, not only from one point of view, but a general perspective of different ideas. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to the Gulf Cultural Club, and specifically Mr. Saeed Shahabi for the invitation. I'm going to present my slides, and for the slides I chose a topic that was the main slogan of the revolution and the people who won the government after the revolution: independence, freedom, Islamic, and republic. This was the main promises of the Islamic Revolution that changed Iran in February 1979. So, in my talk, I'm going to have a scientific look to independence, 4 items: independence, freedom, Islam, and republic or democracy. The situation of democracy, how it changed during the last 40 years. So I've been told it can be an interesting topic for you, because in most of cases, when we hear from others, they are exaggerating maybe 1 or 2 points and not explaining all of the ideas, what's happening. But we are short in time, and I'm just explaining every item like a bullet point. I'm not going deep in it, but there are references there, and you can follow up the references if you are interested. First of all, independence. I'm going to have a check the scientific independence after the revolution, the political independence, the economical, and the cultural. In terms of science, many Iranian students in percentage were going to the West to study for university, and then they were coming back. They were coming back after finishing their studies in West before the revolution. But actually, after the revolution, that number declined a lot. And now 60% of the university students are women. That's quite interesting number. By one of the famous scientific references, Iran is the 22nd science producer of whole world. This is one of the numbers that I can tell you. In terms of independence in politics, Iran is really independent. They take decisions for themselves. And maybe in some minor situations, they influenced by others. But generally, Iran decided its own what to do. But unfortunately, in terms of economy, still we are dependent to oil. Most of the country economy is dependent to the oil at the moment. And in terms of culture, I can say our culture was vibrant. We influenced by the other cultures. And also, at the same time, we influenced other cultures that can help the country to develop. The second item in the slogan, the first was independence, the second is freedom. By the Freedom House, Iran is 180th country between 210 countries in terms of the definition of their freedom. Another item for freedom is internet these days. We do have two types of restriction of internet in country. One is inter-country, another one is enforcing from out of country. In terms of the inside the country that's controlling the government, a lot of social medias are blocked. People cannot officially use them. But in practice, millions of people are members of Facebook. Millions of Iranians are using Facebook despite it's legally forbidden, including the people in government. They are officially using it. And also Twitter. Twitter is filtered in Iran, but you see a lot of people from government are using it to send their message to other people. But the second filtration of the internet is coming from outside. We are enforced a lot to be restricted from free data by the United States. Our scientists are forbidden to have access to scientific articles because of sanctions. That's really shocking. They don't say that, but it's real. But it's real. The other restriction of free data is the have access to Apple, for example, services, or a lot of Google services. A lot of Google services are blocked in Iran by the United States. And they say only for maybe sanctions. That's one item that's in practice restricting the freedom of Iranian. The next item of freedom is freedom in economy. That can be a topic to speak about. I'll go through. The next item is the religious freedom that I will have a talk in future in detail about it. And for freedom to have access to media, we do have a lot of different restrictions as well. For example, satellite receivers are restricted in Iran. They are not legal, but a lot of people are using it in practice. So that's another contradiction between law and real practice of people. That's restricting freedom. The next item is Islam, that was in the main slogan of the revolutionaries. I searched a lot to find some statistics about the development of Islam during the last 40 years, because I'm a scientist. I'm looking for real data that I can rely on it. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any specific statistics. Iran has been Islamic country from the beginning of Islam in 633 AD. And it became a Shia country from 1511 AD. So Islamic Revolution didn't bring Islam to Iran. Islam, and specifically Shia, was not a new thing to Iran. It has been in country before. And specifically the Sharia law was imposed in country for a long time, from the beginning of Islam, but it never enforced 100%. There had been always some Sharia law that hadn't been enforced. It had been always like that. And even now, it's not like 100% of enforcement of the Sharia law. But what, the statistic that I could find was about the Shia religious sites. They developed a lot. Holy Shrine of Hazrat Masum Qom is very, very bigger in comparison with 40 years ago. The Holy Shrine of Imam Raza salam is very, very bigger in comparison with 40 years ago. About 20 million pilgrims are visiting Holy Shrine of Imam Raza every year. 20 million. That's a shocking number. The next item that I want to go through is the republic or democracy. How is the situation of democracy in Iran and how it changed during the last 40 years? First of all, in terms of economy, how big is the gap between poor and rich? This is a big question, and this was one of the main reasons for revolution. The leaders of revolution promised to fill the gap between poor and rich. One of the items that is showing the gap between poor and rich is the Gini. Now, here you can see from 1986 how the Gini index decreased. It means that in practice, the gap between rich and poor during 1986 up to now filled up a lot in how Gini index is telling us.
What does that mean, sorry?
It's Gini index. Gini index is, if Gini index is 0, it means perfect equality. And if it's 100, it means perfect inequality. So there had been a big inequality at 1986, but gradually decreased by the numbers. But after the last sanctions that imposed and the high rate of inflation in country, one of the people in government said that unfortunately 70% of the labor is on the poverty line. So this is a very new number. The other item to check the democracy is the citizens' right. How affordable is public health? Dr. Marcus said about the public health and how good it is. And for me, as an Iranian who was living there for 32 years and then came here and used NHS system, I can say that the Iranian health care system is working very well. Very well. Better than NHS. I can promise that. The next item is free education. Free education in Iran can fill the gap between poor and rich. Every Iranian young man or woman in villages can study and they can go to the best university of country. In that way, they can change their class of life. in comparison with the previous generation. So there isn't a space for everyone to study, and that's a very big benefit, very big benefit. The next item, from now I will speak about the politics in democracy. What are the main pillars of democracy in politics? One of them is about the elections. How many elections happened in country? From 1906, when the first election in country happened, up to 1979, before the revolution, there was no presidential election, of course, because it was a kingdom country. But after the revolution, there have been 13 different elections for the presidency. And then for the parliament, there have been 25 before, and after the revolution have been 11 elections. For the Senate, there had been a Senate before the revolution, so there have been 7 elections. Then assembly of experts defined in after elections. There had been 5 elections at the time. The municipal elections had been 6 before the revolution and after the revolution. And the constitutional elections had been 3 times before the revolution. And after the revolution, just once, about only 4 months after the revolution, there had been a constitutional election. And finally, referendum. There have been 4 referendums before the revolution. And after the revolution, there have been 1 referendum. The next item is about the distribution of number percentage of clerics. Number of clerics at the parliament. It's very interesting how it changed, the number. I will explain more in my next slide. At the beginning, at the first of revolution, 52% of all of the parliament members have been clerics. But now, this number declined a lot. Now, only 5.9% of the parliament members of clerics. You can see that clearly on the documentaries. The next item of politics is the respect to religious minorities. That's one of the main pillars of democracy, how it was in Iran during the last 40 years. There have been only 3 different religious minorities defined in law: Christianity, Judaism, and Zoroastrians. The other minorities are not in law, and they are restricted in a lot of cases in their religion. 10% of the country is the population of Sunnis, Ahl-Sunnah. And during the last 40 years, there was no Sunni vice president, expediency council, or guardian council. 1.9% of the expert assembly have been Sunni, and 4.6% of the parliament members have been Sunni. The next item to study every democracy is the gender distribution of elites. Is the gender distribution of elites that I will pass about it. And this is another item that I will pass about it. And because I don't have enough time, I have been told by the chair. And finally, the distribution of power is very interesting. It can be very interesting. In this study, that you can see the reference, 2,300 politicians on power studied. Out of all of them, 1,340 had just 1 position at the highest level. And only 5 people had 17 different seats, like president, like parliament members, people like Mr. Hashim Rafsanjani. They had 17 different seats. It shows that only 1% of the people at power had 17 seats. It means the distribution. I didn't include the separation of powers and judicial independence or rule of law that are the pillars of democracy in my talk. And finally, we paid a lot for independence and everything that we do have in country. We had 225,000 martyrs during the last 40 years. This is a very big price that we pay. We unfortunately isolated from a lot of Western countries. It is not easy for Iranian to get the Western countries' visa. The other problem is the conflict with the regional countries, those governments. And we have been for 8 years in war, and excluding that, we have been threatened for war for 30 years. That's a big threat. The Iranian assets has been frozen like $100 billion to $200 billion out of country. You're living in London, possibly. It can be interesting for you that you know during 1970, there had been a big problem in property, London property. After the revolution, 40 to 50 billion pounds of capital came out of country by the people who fled from country. They invested that money in the luxury houses in Kensington, Mayfair, and Los Angeles as well, yes. And finally, I can say, on the time of revolution, the price of $1 was 70.75 Iranian rial, and now the price of $1 is 116,000 rial. That means the rate of inflation and how affordable is it. Finally, I want to say thank you to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Ali Raza. I wish we had more time for your erudite presentation.
So I'm really sorry for the long.
No, that's perfectly okay. I know sometimes it's very difficult, but inshallah, we'll come back again for a more detailed discussion on this. Thank you very much. Before I introduce our next guest speaker, I'll just read a line of poetry written by Allama Iqbal, who is in Iran known as Allama Iqbal Lahori. And he says, I'll read it in Urdu and translate it in English for everyone. He says, Tehran ho gar alam mashriq ka Geneva shahid gore azar ki taqdeer badal jaye. What he's saying, that Europe's imperialists dreamed, but their dream soothsayers soon may read a new way. Asia's Geneva, let Tehran be. Earth's book of fate, new statues may see. So really, Allama Iqbal, over 100 years ago, wrote that if Tehran becomes the Geneva of the East, then the destiny of mankind may change. So perhaps that's what we are looking at, the destiny of mankind changing with this particular revolution. Our next speaker, I'm always very pleased to get our next speaker here. Thank you very much, Brother Saeed, for persuading our wonderful guest to come. He's my mentor. He's the one that inspires me in so many ways. And he was the one who organized the trip back in 1981, when those of us who were a little bit younger than him, I think at that time, went to Iran first in 1981 and had the pleasure and the joy of being in that particular country to experience what was going on and what Marcus was talking about, that, you know, the Iranian nation, how old and cultural it is. So our guest speaker, I will not read his full biography as you've all received it. Suffice it to say that he's a well-known academic, an economist, a journalist, a writer, and really there are so many things that he does. It would take perhaps 20 minutes and eat away in his time to say everything. Please welcome Professor Dr. Iqbal Asari and a warm hand.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Friends and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum and good evening. Thank you, Shabir, and thank you, Dr. Said, for inviting me again. Marcus and Alizadeh have actually covered a lot of ground.
And I'm sure they haven't taken your thunder away.
No, I don't think so. I think if Marcus was really British, he wouldn't have this sentiment. So we can see the Greek heritage coming out of that. Thank you, Marcus, for overcoming the atmosphere around you all the time. Yeah. So I just want to start by relating a small anecdote. Me and Dr. Said were visiting Iran, I think this was early 1980s. And this was still during the war with Iraq. And we were in Mashhad city. We were in a hotel and then we thought, let's go out for a stroll. So we went out. Now remember, this is the time of war, yeah? So sometime afterwards, 2 or 3 guards stopped us and said, "Where are you going? Who are you?" So I thought maybe it's easy if I explain to them in Farsi. So I spoke to them in my broken Farsi, that we are guests and so and so. So they're talking to each other, they say, "Mashkuk." Farsi will do me. These people are really suspicious because they even know Farsi. And you can see the mindset is different because this is a war situation. So they say, "Where's your passports?" "They're in the hotel." "Why did you leave them in the hotel? What are you talking about?" And it took us a couple of hours to extricate ourselves from this. And we were friends and we were completely non-threatening, 2 guys roaming around. But clearly in a situation of war, you have to be prepared for anything which can happen. I mean, just imagine if a terrorist incident happened in Manchester and you were passing near there with a rucksack, you will not be left alone. I mean, this poor Brazilian guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time before we killed him because we thought he was a terrorist. Yeah? So I think those kind of things happen. And as Marcus says, we are not here to give unqualified support to anything. We are looking at the broad parameters, looking at the overall justice or otherwise. But rather than filling those gaps, I just want to take us back a little bit to the origin of the kind of movement we have seen in Iran over the last 40 years. Clearly, and I think most Iranians will agree with me, the origin of this is the constitutional revolution in the first 10 years of the 19th century, the 20th century, 1906 to be precise, constitutional movement. And the origin of that is a development in Shi'i law, which is very, very interesting. As you know, in Shi'ism, the Imam, when he is alive, as a successor to the Prophet, he is taken to be infallible, therefore cannot make any mistakes. So whatever the Imam says, goes. However, after the occultation of the Imam, and his expected reappearance at some point in time, which nobody knows, there is now a confusion here whether his representatives or his followers, top followers in terms of top scholars, also acquire that position. If they do, then we have a problem, because we cannot say they said anything wrong. So Ayatollah Naimi has written a thesis on this, because this problem was actually being experienced at that time. A lot of scholars were saying that, look, the Sharia is enough for us, we don't need any constitution and all this. So the debate between Mashru'e, the Sharia, and Mashrute, constitutional rule, was very rife. So he starts by explaining and demonstrating that during the occultation of the 12th Imam, there is no infallible ruler. Therefore, we should have a constitutional check on any ruler. This was the essence of the thing, that the constitution should be ruling, not a particular person, obviously. Now, as the thing went on, there was a twist which was put in by saying that any law was subject to a veto by a council of religious scholars, even in 1906. And since you mentioned Iqbal says, this is perhaps the biggest mistake the Iranian nation made. If they had left the democratically elected representatives of the people to decide what is right and wrong, and transiently, not absolutely, they would have developed much better. Remember, Iqbal is writing during the time of Reza Shah, before the revolution and so on. He was long gone. But his observation was that that was a problematic balance. That discussion came back to life after the overthrow of Prime Minister Mossadegh, 1953, again by our good friends, Americans and British at that time. And again, during the revolution, this became a big issue. And you see in the constitution of Iran at the moment, the principle is still enshrined that the Assembly of Guardians, Council of Guardians, has got the veto on any developments. And so that thing is still there. There was a slight modification in the beginning, because I think there was a little bit more open discussion on this. They had a 12-member Council of Guardians. 6 were religious scholars and 6 were leading legal experts. If there were issues of religious import only, then the religious scholars' decision predominated. If there were general issues, then the majority of the scholars would predominate. What has happened is that over a period of time, the religious scholars have identified every issue as only religious. So the other 6 have become more or less redundant. And one of the issues, for example, which has been exercising the mind of a lot of Iranian leaders and politicians is the qualification for anybody standing for a political post, especially presidents. What has happened is that the Guardianship Council has disqualified people he doesn't like for whatever reason, claiming that this is a religious issue. It's not a political issue for the country. So you see, that problem is still hanging over the thing in terms of the constitutional authority of the leader. I think that's one of the issues which will resolve, but I don't know how it will resolve. It is a very vexed religious issue and a lot of history behind it. The other one is that by the nature of things, there is a slight mix-up between the leader or the wali or the lead faqih and the judiciary. because the faqih is supposed to appoint the judiciary. Now, if you have appointed somebody and that somebody makes mistakes or doesn't behave as you expect, what do you do? It's your own appointee. We don't have time, but we can go into cases where this has also created issues. However, having said that, this is a unique evolution over 40 years of a political theory which was completely out of the air. It was never practiced anywhere. And it's still evolving. And as Aliza said, we've had 13 elections, no coup d'etats, no military takeovers. And remember, sometimes the country was in really deep trouble. During the war, Iraq-Iran war, when Saddam had taken over parts of Ahwaz and was very close to creating quite a lot of havoc in the country. The Americans were supplying him with chemical weapons, missiles, whatever he had, and they were actually throwing those things on Tehran. This is kind of situation where an army could easily say, yes, I think we can do better. We need to defend this country better. During all these difficult times, they've been able to hold together a political system with all its different facets and some imperfections together. Some elections have been very well conducted, some elections have been a little bit less well conducted, but that is par for the course. And as Marcus said, and there are more figures you can have, if you look at the Human Development Index of Iran, clearly life expectancy of 76 is probably in the top 10 in the world. So you will have amongst Muslim countries only Turkey and Iran. Turkey is about 74, 75. Iran is 76. Literacy-wise, Iran is better. Female literacy-wise, Iran is much better. Infant mortality-wise, which is an indicator of health services, Iran is at OECD standards. Availability of clean water, you're looking at 99% of the population. Health system, as Alizadeh says, in day-to-day matters, it's not very different from what we have in this country. And this is despite 30 years of sanctions from all kinds of places. So yes, they've done quite a lot. They've achieved quite a lot. And part of the reduction in the Gini coefficient is because of this on the ground. Everybody has got certain things which would otherwise cost a lot of money in different countries. So I remember I was in India, I was lecturing at the Madras Institute of Management. And this is like 1985, I think. And I was telling them that life expectancy in Iran is better than ours, speaking as an Indian. No, it can't be, it can't be. We are sending people to space, we are doing this and that. What are you talking about? Iran is a rubbish country. I said, okay, let's bring the figures and show you. You have to learn from some people what can be done even under the worst circumstances. I accept that this has been done quite successfully. That is why it is not easy to shake this system by external powers. Internal forces will shape it, I don't think it will destroy it, it will shape it. Iran is also a predominantly young population. And in religious terms, let me give you one other statistic which is very, very interesting. Iran has got the most advanced and the most successful drug rehabilitation program in the world, according to UN records. Now, those of you who are Muslims will need to understand that drug rehabilitation involves giving drugs to addicts from state money. So now religiously, can you give drugs from state money to some people to get off drugs? Okay? So you can see the kind of innovative juridical thinking which has also happened in that country to enable these kind of things to happen. Okay, so that's where Iran itself is, and I've pinpointed to you the constitutional conundrum which they have, which they will need. By the way, there's one other aspect. The leader or the wali does not need to be Iranian. So I was wondering when I was coming here, if an Iraqi top mujtahid is eligible for leadership, what will happen to the whole constitution? The president has to be an Iranian, but the leader, I think, cannot be because it's in specification. But that's just an aside for us. So now we come to the current situation, and part of the brief was to talk about this JCPOA and so on. I think that clearly in terms of the moral high ground, the United States is losing its moral high ground in the world, not only Venezuela-wise, but otherwise. So who are the key actors in the United States hierarchy at the moment, apart from Donald Trump, whom I don't need to spend time on? You have John Bolton, Michael Pompeo, and Rudy Giuliani. Okay? These people think that the MKO terrorists are the true freedom fighters for an independent Iran. They have relocated these people from Iraq to Albania, country which is a mafia state, and now they are training them to go to Iran and take over. If these people have no knowledge of what is happening in the world, or they do not want to see, I'm afraid that to put our faith in these people as United States top policy makers is absolutely scary. They're worse than psychopaths. And the Europeans are just not able to do anything. Any treaty which they don't like, they say we are withdrawing from it. Not only the nuclear treaty, whatever treaty, climate change, whatever other treaty, so we just withdraw from it. Nuclear, with the Russians, we withdraw from it. And also they said that if the courts, international courts, punish American soldiers for killing innocent people in Afghanistan, we will have sanctions against those judges and punish them. But this is the rule of law in the law of general. So I think this is a big scare throughout the world, and I don't know how to get rid of it, but that's before. I hope that they don't do more damage and more killing of people, like they did with the Iraq war. They supplied Saddam Hussein with chemical weapons, missiles, with anything. And today they are putting themselves forward as champions of human rights. And then there is the US Congress. It's a very strange situation. sensible in some ways, but absolutely childish in others. When President Obama was negotiating the nuclear deal with Iran and the 5 other powers, this Congress invited Benjamin Netanyahu to come and address them. And he was talking nonsense, and they were cheering him like children in a nursery. The whole of Congress, both parties. Again, it makes you wonder, so who is in charge?
Is it system problem?
I don't know, you tell me. This is why, I've been to America many times, and I like the people. But when I see these things, I wonder, have I got the wrong end of the stick or what? Are these people real? The only thing is that they have a lot of deadly power, and they can do a lot of damage. So we have to be careful on this. Then come to Europe. Europe itself is in a big dilemma. It can see the moral problem, but it is also in hope to the United States. And you can see in this sanctions debate, Europe says we don't agree with the sanctions, but we can't do anything about it. We have to go with it. European companies say we have to go with it. The Chinese and the Russians will also take their own interests into account. Yeah? They will not, they're not Iran's cousins or uncles or something. They are people who will take their own interests. So as Marcus said, the problem is that if this entity survives, then the United States has big problems. Because if you look at 1953, what happened is that the then Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh only said, we are going to nationalize our oil. Nothing else. It is our oil, so we are going to make it ours. And they became so upset, they overthrew him with whatever they could, British and Americans. But after that, every country nationalized their oil. Today, there is no country which says this oil doesn't belong to us or it can be exploited. There are now contracts for companies to exploit. And so their problem is that if this thing survives, every country will then have an independent foreign policy or thinking, and then you have to deal with them as equals. You can't now go and dictate to them that you are something else. On top of that, the human development parameters, education, the access to scientific knowledge, and those who go to Iran, visit Iran, see even despite the sanctions, what can be done, how things can run, will be amazed. In fact, I had a very close friend in Malaysia. She is a professor of chemical engineering. And she was quite well disposed to Iran and so on. She went to visit. She came back. She phoned me. She was crying. I said, why are you crying? You have been to Iran, you have visited it first time, you liked it before. She said, I am crying because if this propaganda has fooled somebody like me who is sympathetic to this extent, when I saw that everything I knew about Iran was wrong from this propaganda. And I'm worried about those who are not sympathetic, how they would feel what is happening in this country. So I think that is the big challenge. Okay, last point, Shabi. Last point is that let us look at who funded Saddam Hussein. I'm talking money. Arms we know. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, and the same people want now to fund the United States to fight Iran. The same actors who have no other thoughts, no other way to deal with this region. But as Marcus showed, and I think you have to think, if both your borders were, one side was Taliban, one side was Saddam Hussein or ISIS, what would you do? Would you sit down and say, I don't interfere in anybody's affairs? You can't. You have to make your borders safe. The United States is jumping up and down for Cuba for the last 50 years. And Cuba is nothing compared to Taliban in Afghanistan or ISIS in Iraq and Syria. So it has to be dealt with, and it is difficult. I don't think this phase is going to be easy, but I think that given the background, it is survivable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Bach, as usual, concluding with a very, very positive comment. So hopefully in the next 40 years, certainly I won't be here, but other youngsters may be marking the